My mother's grandfather, Beryl Barney Mann, was born in Pumpiani, Lithuania in 1893. He lived by a river and became a powerful swimmer. He was known as a very hard worker with a fantastic sense of humor. He lived with his parents and 3 brothers. In what was then Russia, he went to a public school as well as the Cheder, which was an extracurricular institution dedicated to Jewish studies. Barney was not a very observant Jew, though he was religious in the way he conducted his life and in the way he treated others. At age 20, Barney left his whole family behind in order to avoid the army. In around 1913, he left for South Africa via Hamburg and New York. He sailed on a ship called the Pretoria. Although it was feasible, he couldn't convince his family to come with him. His parents had been doing well financially in Lithuania, and they did not want to abandon their home and other children. His 2 brothers were already enlisted in the army. Barney never saw his family ever again. They most likely perished in World War II, as did 95% of the Jews in Lithuania, and we are not sure what happened to them. Barney tried to locate them after the Holocaust, but was never able to trace them again. When Barney first came to South Africa, he became a naturalized citizen. He adapted well and worked very hard. He didn't even know English at first. His positive work ethic helped him earn money by working for people, and he was eventually able to buy his own business in a small town called Vryheid in the Natal province of South Africa. He was very popular among Jews as well as Gentiles. Eventually, he owned a hotel, a bottle shop, and a hardware shop. Barney's wife, Rivka Hilovitz, was born 1.5 miles away from Pumpiani, where Barney was born. Funnily enough, Barney and Rivka met and married in Johannesburg. Barney was an acquaintance of Rivka's brothers in Lithuania and established contact with them when he arrived in South Africa. Barney and Rivka honeymooned in Durban in around 1923. My grandmother, Rose Mann, was born in 1928 in Vryheid, South Africa. Her sister Jean was born 3 years later in 1931. Rose and Jean had tough childhoods. The girls were sent to boarding school at age 6 and only saw their parents on weekends. This was because their parents lived outside of town and it was too far for the girls to walk to school. When Rose was 14 and Jean was 11, their mother Rivka died and they moved to Johannesburg. In around 1963, Rose met Philip Lopez and they married soon after. Jean met and married George Tobianski. Jean and George emigrated to Australia, as did 2 of their children. Their 3rd child emigrated to London. In 1964, my mother's sister Michelle was born in Johannesburg, and my mother Susan was born in 1966. Michelle studied, married, and had children in Johannesburg. Today she still lives in Johannesburg with her family. Michelle's son attended a Jewish modern Orthodox school called King David, and her family is still affiliated with the Orthodox community in South Africa. My mother Susan, on the other hand, traveled fairly extensively outside of South Africa before leaving to live in the United States permanently. She lived in Bolivia in 1984 as an exchange student. She returned to South Africa and attended the University of Witwatersrand starting in 1985. Susan volunteered for a 3-week army program in Israel in December 1987 during her college vacation. While volunteering in Israel, she stayed with the family on the Golan. The mother mentioned that she had a brother living in Pretoria with 4 sons. Coincidentally, when Susan met Dan, she realized that he was one of those 4 sons. Dan and Susan married in 1993. They were married at the Walmeren Street Shul in the center of Johannesburg. Their marriage ceremony was the last that was celebrated in this historic synagogue, which had been the main synagogue in Johannesburg for over 100 years. Because of violence and unrest in the area, the synagogue was moved to a safer area in the suburbs of Johannesburg. Susan's paternal grandparents, her parents, and her sister Michelle had all been married in that shul. Because of growing violence and political unrest in South Africa, Dan and Susan emigrated to the United States of America a few months after their wedding. Dan was born in America, and because of this, Dan and Susan were eligible to live and work in the States. Also, Dan's parents were living and working in Washington, D.C., and this provided a support structure for my parents when they arrived in South Africa. The emigration of my parents from South Africa was very different from the emigration of my great-grandfather Barney from Lithuania. My parents had the support of both their parents and knew they would see Susan's parents again soon, either when they visited the USA or when Susan and Dan would return to South Africa to visit. Initially, Susan and Dan were drawn to the modern Orthodox communities in Washington, D.C. This was because they had been raised in Orthodox communities in South Africa. However, over time, they became drawn to a more egalitarian conservative congregation, despite it going against some traditions that they were used to. Many of the traditions, beliefs, prayers, and even the melodies are the same as my parents were used to in South Africa. My sister Megan and I were both born in Washington, D.C. and celebrated our B'nai Mitzvah here. I was very lucky to be able to celebrate my bar mitzvah with many of Jean's children and children's children from London and Australia. This gathering brought together many of Barney's descendants. I believe this was made possible by Barney's decision to leave Pumpiani in 1913. Had he stayed, it would have been very likely that he would have perished with his family, with the rest of the Jews in Pumpiani. This is the story of Barney Mann's family.